How many relationships have you damaged because you had to be right? Most of us learned how to communicate from our families, our schools, and our cultures. So we picked up these conversational habits without ever questioning them. We argue to be right instead of learning something new. We make promises we can't keep because we're too uncomfortable saying no. We tell ourselves stories that limit who we can become, and we don't even realize we're doing it. I used to think good communication was about being articulate or even winning the argument. I thought if I could just find the right words, I could make people see my point of view. But what I discovered through my own journey is that most of our conversations happen on complete autopilot. We're not really listening. We're just waiting for our turn to speak. And most of the time, we're defending positions we never even consciously chose. And then I started meeting people who communicated differently than I was used to. People who could disagree with me without making me feel attacked. People who could ask questions that made me think instead of questions designed to trap me. After conversations with them, I'd walk away feeling expanded instead of drained. There was something they understood about communication that I was missing for quite a long time.
So conscious conversation means to understand conversations in a new way so that we can't be innocent any longer. We learn about them so that we hear and see them differently and think about them differently. And that gives us new options to say, oh, I don't have to respond this way. I can respond this way. Or I don't have to have that automatic reaction. I can change that.
Recent research shows that the average person spends over 70% of their waking hours in some form of communication. Yet most of us have never been taught how conversations actually work. We stumble through negotiations. We struggle with difficult family members, and then we wonder why our relationships feel stuck in the same patterns. What if there was a map for navigating these conversations? What if you could recognize when someone is trying to ram their position down your throat versus when they're genuinely open to learning? What if you could spot your own unconscious stories before they ruin your next relationship or career opportunity? The truth is, every conversation is either moving you toward the life you want or keeping you trapped in the life you've outgrown. And most people never learn the difference. They stay asleep in their conversations, playing out the same scripts their families taught them and wondering why nothing ever really changes. But consciousness in conversation changes everything. It transforms conflict into collaboration. It turns storytelling from a way to stay stuck into a tool for freedom. And it makes promises that actually build trust instead of destroying it. The question is, are you ready to wake up to what's really happening in your conversations? Because once you see these patterns, you can never unsee them. And that's exactly what makes transformation possible. So today, our guest is Chuck Wisner, a leadership coach and author of The 4 Conversations, who spent decades studying how conscious communication can change relationships and even unlock human potential. He combines practical tools with deep awareness work to help people break free from unconscious conversational patterns. So in this conversation, you'll discover how to recognize when you're sleep talking through life, the 4 types of conversations that reveal communication patterns, and why most promises fail, and how commitment builds trust. I used to be one of those people who had grand plans for a big, healthy meal every Sunday night, and I'd make these elaborate meal plans, buy all the ingredients, and then Wednesday would roll around and I'd be staring at that wilted spinach, ordering takeout again. Shopping, planning, and cooking food really can be simple and stress-free, and that's why I love Hungry Root. Hungry Root takes stress out of mealtime by filling your cart with personalized picks and planning your week of meals, getting smarter with every order. With over 15,000 recipes to choose from each week, many ready in just 15 minutes or less, it's so perfect for those nights when you have no energy left. What I love most is their smart cart technology. It actually learns what I like and what I will actually cook. So, no more buying ingredients for recipes that I'll never make. Everything that shows up, I actually use. They screen out over 200 additives, including high fructose corn syrup and artificial sweeteners, only high quality meat and seafood with no hormones or antibiotics, and they carry brands like Vital Farms and Ithaca Hummus that I already trust. The time I've gotten back has been incredible. Instead of spending Sunday meal planning, I'm doing things that actually matter to me. Take advantage of this exclusive offer. For a limited time, get 40% off your first box, plus get a free item in every box for life. Go to hungryroot.com/mindlove and use code mindlove. That's hungryroot.com/mindlove. Code mindlove to get 40% off your first box and a free item of your choice for life. hungryroot.com/mindlove. Code mindlove. I'm so honored to have you here, Chuck. And we are diving into something that I think is so important lately, especially as the world just becomes more and more divisive. And so I'm curious, what does it mean to have a conscious conversation? And how might that challenge the way that we usually communicate?
Well, it is challenging. um, uh, how it changes is, I guess my best example is we grow up learning how to communicate and have conversations through our families and cultures. And we adopt those patterns. I call them conversational patterns, uh, pretty much unconsciously. Uh, how my family was loud and noisy and rambunctious. My wife's family was quiet and reserved. We adopt those things. And so as we grow up and then we go to school and we go to work, we also are influenced by all those, the education and the work business world. So conscious conversation means to understand conversations in a new way so that we can't be innocent any longer. We learn about them so that we hear and see them differently and think about them differently. And that gives us new options to say, oh, I don't have to respond this way. I can respond this way. Or I don't have to have that automatic reaction. I can change that.
What inspired you to write an entire book about this topic?
Long story, short story of a long story. So I've been working with leaders for years. And one of my clients, his name was Jamie Bonini, a great executive at Toyota. We were after we worked together for 5 years or so, and I had been doing work with different companies. He said, "I love all this work, but there's the idea of meditation and awareness and empathy and compassion and language, and how do I connect the dots?" And that stuck with me. And then as I noodle on that for a while. Um, I realize that there are a lot of books out there, but some of them are very esoteric and others are they're scattered. There's a book on this and a book on this. So I said, there's got to be a way to help Jamie and my other clients connect the dots. And that's when I reached back to my training in language to see oh, I see. If we really talk about different types of conversations, all those conversations hold the tools and the practices that connect all the pieces. And so that was a journey. It took me 4 or 5 years because I started with a story that I wasn't a writer and burned through some editors that didn't work out. And then I finally said, I can write this book and I will write this book.
I find it so interesting that even today, I can actually look back through most of my life and the people that were good at having what I would see as conscious conversations. And when I think of a conscious conversation, it's a conversation in which I feel heard
Mm-hmm.
while also having my defenses down for
Mm-hmm.
hearing something new. And I know that's a lot to put on the other person, but I put it on myself. But when I wasn't used to communicating in this way. This is not what I grew up with. This is not how I
Yeah.
learned to uh, debate differing views. And so there's people that I can remember even from being as early as 21, where I'm just like, there's something different about you. I feel different when I leave our conversations together.
So my hunch is, and the book covers these kind of topics. My hunch is that when someone comes more aware of their words and the impact of their words, to do that, you have to be fairly humble And you have to have be some level of comfort with vulnerability because we're trained to have the answers. We're trained to be right. We're trained to defend our position. So often we enter a conversation with a fist, but someone that's doing a conscious conversation is coming in with an open hand. They still have a position, but they're willing to reveal their thinking and their concerns and their worries uh, and their standards underneath their words or they're underneath their position. And to do that, you have to be humble. You say, I do have a perspective, and I might be wrong. I might learn something from you. And if I do, that's great because then I become my brain and my heart and everything opens up.
I've find that when I'm practicing now, the understanding that I am not my ego is
Hmm.
is really the only way I can lean into a conversation well because I'm like, okay, I recognize this is actually just my ego trying to be right.
Right.
And I can step back and there's this disidentification with the ego.
Yes.
But there are people that converse really well, that converse in this way that might not have that spiritual understanding. What are they leaning into when, if they don't have the soul versus the ego worldview that I do?
Yeah. No, I love your comment, Melissa, because um, it's sort of like once our ego likes us to attach to our positions. We're identified with our positions, so we have to defend them or we die. Um, but if when we can realize that we aren't our position, we begin to be the witness of our thinking. And so we're standing outside witnessing. And from that witness place, we can be more centered and we can make different decisions. The people that don't have that, they probably have an innate sort of sense of curiosity because that's what it takes to really listen to other people and absorb their thinking or ask good questions to learn from them. Uh, they're few and far between, but I think if they don't have that sort of notion of separating out from your ego and witnessing yourself, then they must have a curiosity that they learned early in life to really want to understand other people, not just ask questions to prove somebody wrong and prove myself right.
So I love that a big part of your book actually talks about storytelling. That has become just a big thread in my message because I found myself at a really dark time in my life, and it took me a long time to see that I wasn't just a victim of my circumstances. I was a victim of the meaning I was giving my circumstances, the stories that I was telling myself about it. And
Mhm.
so does the idea of storytelling and the idea that our brains fabricate stories, how does that come into this conversation about conscious conversations?
There's four conversations in the book, and the storytelling conversation is primary. It has to come first because we live through stories. They're beautiful things. We get entertained. We have movies. We have books. We have fiction. Um, but they're stories. They're not the truth necessarily. They contain facts and they contain truth, but they're not the truth. So to do the other conversations which are about collaboration and creativity and making good promises and all that, we have to start with our own stories because we have a handful or a bunch of stories that serve us well, and then we have a bunch of stories that don't serve us well. And with your example, what the dark time you went through was a story that was really harmful to your sense of self, right? And probably, had you feeling negative or have you believing less about yourself and having less power in the world or ability to be in the world with your full power. So storytelling is demanding of the reader because it says we have to look at ourselves before we can change our interactions. And that takes courage because ultimately we all have stories that aren't pretty. I grew up with a story in the book about not mm, adopting my grandfather's words to me that I wasn't a big enough man for multiple reasons, and I was a kid. I mean, I was a little boy, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever. But he had his voice has authority. He was the grown up in the room. I grew up thinking I wasn't a big enough man, even though I had a bunch of successes. That was always a nagging message, a nagging sort of noise in the background of my head, until I was able to look at it and go, wait a minute, that was his story of what a man is. It's not my story. I can change what I believe and adopt my own story and drop his. And so it's that process of really looking inside, and then that changes how we show up, and then that changes how our ability to interact with others.
I'm so glad I grew up in the generation where grandparents were nice to you. The generation before that seemed a little bit brutal.
Yeah, well, I was lucky because I joke that it's amazing I'm not a schizophrenic, because I had on one side, which was my father's side, it was a step grandfather. He wasn't my blood grandfather who gave me this message. But then on my mother's side, my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, she just adored me, and she gave me all positive, and she gave me all, you can do anything in the world. And, so I had this sort of shift going on. And finally, I was able to let go of the negative and re-embrace the positive.
A thought that was going through my head as you were speaking is I'm looking at my journey of just how I've shifted my worldview over the years. And I recognize a time where I was trying to deprogram from a lot of the messages that I had got growing up. And
Right.
during that time, it was much more difficult for me to be open to conscious conversations because I was afraid that other people were going to poison my worldview back to where I was. I wasn't strong enough to hold my own. And so it's like, nope, nope, I'm just going to keep away from anyone who might have anything to say that'll pull me back to where I was before.
Mhm.
And that's not a, the best place to be. Now I recognize that even aversion is sort of the same stronghold as addiction. Like if you can only feel safe by avoiding certain triggers, then you're
Mhm.
not really safe because you're completely susceptible to your environment.
Right.
And so it takes a really strong person to be able to come into a dialogue, especially around a sensitive topic, and be like, okay, I'm going to hear whatever you have to say, as scary as that might be.
Wherever you go, whatever they get into, from chill time to everyday adventures, protect your dog from parasites with Credelio Quattro. For full safety information, side effects, and warnings, visit CredelioQuattroLabel.com. Consult your vet or call 1-888-545-5973. Ask your vet for Credelio Quattro and visit QuattroDog.com.
Yes, I think as we do our work, there are these transitions where we sort of are getting rid of the story, but then we're a little uncomfortable. We're still a little insecure. So if someone pushes the wrong button, we get triggered and we fall backwards. Um, but eventually, I think I like to think of it as we pay attention to them, they sort of melt away. There's no magic button where I can switch it and go, okay, you'll never think that again, or you never feel that again, or believe that again. There's no magic buttons, but they sort of melt away if we keep paying attention and putting attention on, oh, I see, I can do that differently. I can respond differently. I can react differently. So it's a process. It's a practice. I love in the book, I talk a lot about this is a journey. There's no magic switch. It's a practice. So yeah, it takes a little time, and it takes, I think when we start looking at ourselves, we have to do it non-judgmentally. If we're really just going, oh, I'm so stupid for adopting that story, and why did I do that? We're in another cycle of negativity. So to be able to look at the stories non-judgmentally and go, wow, that's a pattern I adopted, but I don't have to keep it. Another pattern I adopted was when I had four siblings and we were young and kids misbehaved. We did all kinds of stupid stuff. My father's often reaction, he had a long rope. But when he got triggered, he got mad and he hollered and he screamed and he chased us up the stairs or whatever, whatever he did. Um, but when I had young kids and they got out of hand, and my wife was sensitive, more sensitive to it than I would get angry and I would scream and I would start getting, vocal. And one time I don't know what happened, but the kids were crying. My wife was not happy. And I was like, what just happened? And I looked at that. I checked that out and said, oh, I'm turning into my father.
Yeah.
That was a pattern I knew. That was a pattern that I adopted. So I was unconsciously doing that. When I shine the light on it, all of a sudden there's awareness. All of a sudden I can do something about it.
Yeah, kids, man. That has been the most growth work I've ever had.
Yes, it's true.
It's like you think you're at a certain point and then they just show you've got a long way to go.
Yeah.
You also talk about how most people are asleep in their conversations.
Mm-hmm.
How so, and what are the consequences of that?
So that sort of is another word or metaphor, sleep talking, uh, for being in conversations on autopilot.
Yeah.
We're just playing out the pattern. We're just I'm playing out the anger pattern, or I'm playing out the not big enough man pattern, or my wife playing out her parents told her she wasn't as smart as her friends, so I'm not smart enough messages. So when we're playing out the pattern, that's what I say we're sleep talking, because we're not really investigating our story. We're not really investigating that negative voice in our head that's holding us back.
So, with all of this in mind, I want to move into the 4 types of conversations that you describe in the book and why they're considered the missing map for communication. Let's dive into them.
I'll tell a little story before. If you and I, where do you live? Where you're in California, right?
I live in Big Bear, California, a little mountain town.
Okay, all right. So I live in the Northeast, right? And so if I went with a guide to Alaska to spend 6 months with the Inuits, um, they have some 30 names for snow. And if I learned there's 30 names for snow, when I came back to New England in the next winter and it starts snowing, I wouldn't see snow the same way again, because I would all of a sudden I have distinctions. Oh, that's this kind of snow, and they have names for them. That's this and that's this. And if I had learned those and had those, my relationship to snow would change. So I like to think of the 4 conversations as giving us new distinctions about how conversations work, so we can't be in them the same way. We can go, oh wow, this is what's happening. This is what's happening. So it sort of broadens our understanding and deepens our knowledge. So the 4 conversations are storytelling, which we started covering. If we do that well, we can really get really good at collaborative conversations. Collaborative conversations are a whole different set of tools and practices, because we're not trained to be good advocates and inquirers. We're trained to be inquisitors. Is that the right word? Set up inquisitions, or just hammer our position and prove ourselves right. A good collaborative conversation is a mutual learning conversation where I'm open, I'm humble, I'm vulnerable. I have a position, but I'm willing to learn from you, and I'm willing to change my mind. I'm willing to say I don't know, or I'm willing to say I never thought of it that way. When we have that kind of conversation, that sort of eases us into what I call the creative conversation, because that's where we start generating ideas together. We're all a little familiar with that because of the word brainstorming. But the trouble with a lot of brainstorming, if we don't understand how these conversations work, we can be in a brainstorm and someone say, "Oh, what about this?" And someone in the room says, we tried that 2 years ago. That'll never work." And immediately that creativity is shut down. So the creativity is conversation is really allowing ourselves to dream and wonder what's possible. It's about possibilities with other people. And the other part of the creative conversation is internal and individual, in that it's about our intuition. It's about appreciating and developing our right brain versus our left rational brain. So there's 2 parts to that conversation. And the final conversation is commitment. And that's the action conversation, where we take okay, who's going to do what by when, where we make promises, we make agreements, we sign contracts. And that happens every day, 24 hours a day in our lives, at home and at work. At home, who's emptying the dishwasher? Who's taking the kids to school? Who's doing this? At work, it's like, okay, what's our plan for the next 6 months? Who's going to do what by when? That's it. And we sign up and we make promises. Unfortunately, we don't understand that conversation well, so we do it in a sloppy way. And a bad promise broken, not taken care of, is where distrust begins, where we lose trust in people. So that was a brief hit on all four conversations.
And so, with your understanding of these conversations, how has it changed the way you show up in one? Like, are you kind of scanning, like, ooh, this is a story I can sit back,
Relax. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
so yeah. The value of the four conversations is to increase our knowledge about how they work, and we weave in and out of these four all day long, often not thinking about it. But when things don't feel right, or things are feel a little off, then it's time to go, what's really going on here? And we could say, am I trying to be collaborative and that person is just ramming their position, you know, and not really collaborating? What can I read the room? What's going on here? Because then we can take a more effective action, more productive action. Um, Storytelling, yeah, we lay back. We go to cocktail parties, um, and we're telling stories. We're telling stories about the kids. We're telling stories about politics. We're telling stories about how we feel, you know, and that's great. But you might be at a cocktail party and you run into someone who's like starts selling their business to you. Well, that's a shift in the conversation. They're no longer telling stories. They're trying to, ram their position into your head to say, hey, you sign up, call me next week, or give the business card. So I think it gives us a new window, and it takes a little practice to really appreciate when we're in what. Most casual days, we don't really pay attention because we're just going about our business, except the commitment conversation is part of our daily lives, because every promise we make creates tomorrow. Like the
Mm.
promise I make today says what I'll do and what other people will do tomorrow. And with that awareness, we should be and can be much more careful about the promises we make.
Say you're in a conversation with somebody. It starts as the storytelling conversation. You guys are both just having a good time talking about the kids. And then somebody in the conversation does take it over, and you could tell they're may not be trying to sell them your business, but they're trying to sell you their worldview.
Mm.
As the only one in the conversation that is attuned to the idea of conscious conversations, how do you handle that?
There's a couple options. The most productive option is give them some rope, let them listen to them, let them let them say enough till you have a read that, oh yeah, this person, guy, gal, whatever, is really trying to take over the conversation and push their position. So when you get that, when you realize that, one option is to say, it's really an interesting position. I don't agree. But right now is not the time I want to have that conversation. So thanks for telling me. And I could remove myself. And that's an okay option, to just say, thanks. I I don't want to debate this right now. It's not what I'm here for. Thanks. And move on. That's one option. It's a safe option, and it's an option we often don't feel comfortable making. Um, Another option is to just be much more direct with them. Say, we're having, what I'd like to do right now is have a conversation, continue our conversation about the kids and soccer. And if you want to talk sometime or have coffee about this position, I'd be happy to do that with you. So some of them, one is moving and the other is deflecting, and another is just try to navigating and invite them to a different time, different place to talk about what they want to talk about.
Yeah, it's such a touchy subject these days. I find myself going in between like, okay, let me just drown this out. Then I won't feel triggered. And then I'm like, but am I showing up correctly? Like, can I just be curious? And then I'll have another voice. But you already know what they're going to say. You've literally, the reason you don't believe this is because you've already researched it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then now you're just being one sided, but you feel like you already know your side. It reminds me of the quote that you have in your book that I actually wrote down was most people think they're thinking, but they're really just rearranging their prejudices. Like I can see
Right.
that happening in my
Right.
own mind. And it's like, on one hand, I'm like, I feel like I'm right. I know the mainstream worldview. I don't agree with it, but should I still listen? Do I not need to?
Yeah, yeah. No, I think I mean, I think we all have that experience. And in a way, it's a boundary issue. Where do we want to, how much do we want to give, of our time and our energy, right? And where do we draw the line? And I think we're not very skilled in conversations drawing that line and saying, enough, thank you very much, you know, nice to see you, bye. Right. Because it's just not the right time, or it's just, you don't want to have that, you don't want to get into that battle right now, whether it's political or whatever the hot subject is.
Yeah. I have been practicing things like, so how does that make you feel? Like changing the subject without changing the subject. Like instead
Yeah.
of the facts, it's like, does it make you feel good feeling right? Do you
Mm.
ever consider the other people? Like ask questions totally roundabout the argument. That's been kind of fun. But again, it's more like a game I'm playing with myself to get me through the moment.
Yeah, yeah. I think, with kids and things like that, rather than tell them what's going on, to ask how you feel is a really good option. But with adults, um, the other piece of my book that's sort of a thread that moves is this four questions
Yeah.
of desires, concerns, authority, power issues, and standards. So those questions are not only great for reflecting on our own stories. Let's say if we have a strong judgment or a strong opinion we want to say, what's this about? We can investigate our own stuff, right? What are the facts? What's inside my story? But they become a great shorthand for asking questions. So if you're in that conversation, instead of saying how you're feeling, you say, what's your basic standard? If you're saying this is how it should be, how do you think about measuring what's happening? Like for me, the word standard embraces our morals, our rights and wrongs, our beliefs, everything that is under every judgment we make. Oh, bosses shouldn't behave that way. Uh, Fathers shouldn't behave that way. And so those standards are underneath every judgment we have. So sometimes just taking one of those things and saying, so what are you really concerned about? Tell me what you're concerned about. What it does is forcing them to look under their position to the deeper thinking. And I like to think of it as, okay, if they come with a fist, if I ask the four questions or two of the questions or three of the questions, I'm asking questions to see if they'll let go of their fist and open their hand a little bit. So
Yeah.
they start revealing, well, this is why I really care about this, because I believe X. Say, oh, wow, that's really interesting. I think about it really differently. That's talking about concerns or standards or even desires and goals is a very different conversation than arguing about the topic. Because the topic usually keeps us at the top of at the position level, not the beliefs underneath the position.
Yeah. So, in these four questions of desires, concerns, power dynamics, and standards,
Mhm.
what would be an example of a question around power dynamics?
So the power dynamics are a little different than the other three questions, because before you ask the question, you have to you have to be aware of power dynamics that might be playing out, right? And they can be very subtle, or they can very, very just clear. Because in hierarchies, in businesses that take hierarchies really seriously, what the power uh, struggle, power layers are. You know what the hierarchy is. Um, But with friends, we might give one friend's voice more authority than we give another friend. You know, one friend says, "I don't like what you're writing or what you're doing." Another another friend might say that. One friend we might go, "Wow, tell me more because I really care what you think." The other friend we might just, "Oh, he's just that way. He's always judgmental, and so I'm not going to pay attention." So there are all these subtle power issues that play in every conversation. Parent child have incredibly subtle power issues. Parents fall into trap around that. Um, so all of our conversations have power issues. So the first thing you do is like be aware that there are power issues, right? And then in any given relationship, how's that playing out? How's it making you feel? Do you feel like you can be yourself? Do you feel like you can speak up? Do you feel safe? Um, in business, it's called psychological safety, which is a huge thing for leaders to create psychological safety so they don't just have yes men walking around them, feeding their ego. So it's a tricky one, but it starts with awareness. Like, okay, because if I'm aware of the power issue, say with a boss, then and I have something important to say because I discovered something that's counter to what they are believing, I can say, okay, he's the boss. It's his decision. So I can change how I'm in that conversation. I can say, it's your decision, but I came across some data that I think is really important so we can make the best decision possible. And I have a concern that if we don't take this into account, we might go down the wrong road. So you're asking the question out of service to the project, to the company, whatever it is, you're asking, you're offering something, but you acknowledge the power dynamic.
And so with the other questions, then, is it as simple as desire, for example? Like, what do I really want from this? And what does the other person really want from this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. That reminds me of mediation because mediation only works if both parties are willing to say, okay, I'm happy to come to mediation and tell my story because I want to resolve this with the other person. If both parties aren't willing to enter with the goal and a desire to resolve the conflict, it won't work. They'll end up back in court, right? So yeah, with desires, and again, it might change from parenting to business or home to work. But the idea is to say, instead of arguing about what's right and wrong or what my position is versus what your position is, when we say, do we both want the same thing out of this conversation? My desire, and again, often we have to lead. I'll lead and say, here's my goal, or here's my desire. I would like us to come out of this with a clear picture of X, Y, and Z. If I do that, it invites the other person to say what their desire is, which might be in the background of their consciousness, not on the tip of their tongue. So if I open up and say, here's my desire, and they open up, it might totally shift the conversation. We might all say, oh, wow, we're looking at this with different outcomes in mind. So can we start there and say, can we find an outcome that we agree on? That's a very different conversation, just arguing about positions.
And so then concerns would be more like what we're afraid of happening in the situation.
Yeah, concerns are sort of a time-oriented thing because it's like whatever happens is happening now or happened today. I don't want it to repeat tomorrow or next week or next year. So their concerns are like, what am I worried about? I'm worried about this happening. All right. So concerns are really cool because no one can take your concern away. You can voice your concern sometimes, say, well, here's what I'm really concerned about. They might not agree. They might have a different set of concerns, but they can't say, oh, you're wrong to have that concern. Right. Um, then the other side of the coin is concerns also get us in trouble because we can go into worry mode about future that we have no control over. We're worrying about, oh my gosh, well, look what's going to happen. But that's a worrying concern that isn't serving us well. So concerns should be oriented pretty much to the moment. Go, what am I concerned about right now, and what can I do differently? Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And then standards is identifying sort of the position of what each person thinks should be, is what I'm gathering.
Yeah. So standards, like I said, is an umbrella term for all of our beliefs and our prejudices and, our rights and wrongs and our morals. So every judgment we have and every opinion we hold tightly, if you ask yourself, so what is my standard that is making me have that judgment? That can cut pretty deep. Um, just an example is coming up in my mind. I did some work with women's groups a few years back, and we're talking about standards and how that affects our lives. And I would say, what would be, how many in the room, if you leave your home in the morning and the beds aren't made, you feel like you're not a good enough mom or wife? And a majority of hands in the room would go up. And I'm saying, that's fine. You can have that standard. All I'm asking is, where did that come from? Who, who, who did you learn that from? Where did you adopt that? You can keep it, but if it causes you suffering, then we should investigate it. Then we should say, you know what? It's an okay standard, but maybe every day I can't live up to that. And that's okay. So I can lower my standard and lower my suffering. Um, or friends that are super judgmental, sometimes I can say, so that's a pretty strong judgment. Tell me why that matters to you, and what's underneath. What's the basis for saying that's right or wrong or good or bad? Help me understand that. Again, unwinding, unopening that, trying to help them open their fist a little bit to reveal their thinking. Uh, some people will join you, some people won't join you.
Yeah, I can see that in my friends that I've had the hardest time understanding, or
Mm,
family members. The realization that changed my life was understanding, wait, oh, this is the mental cage that they're in. And so it's not about me or
mhm,
projecting this onto me. It's like, it doesn't matter what it is. It could be about something political, but it could also just be about like, well, this should be this way. Like the counter should be wiped down. I'm like, I've got little kids. Like, I don't care if my counter's wiped down all the time. Like, and so it's just like, it's the standard underneath, like
That's
the way
right.
things should be, the way you should show up to a party and always bring something the way you should. And like, there's been a lot of those conversations with a particular family member where I'm just like, I think this person would rather me show up with my 2-month-old than bring a dish, but only one of them is happening. So, but it's
Yeah.
like, nope, it should be like, these are the standards of etiquette or whatever it is. And
Yeah,
um,
our standards of what feels right to us. I mean, your example is great. And my wife and I used to struggle early. We've been married for a long time, but early on, it was like, um, you have a dinner party and you have a kitchen full of dishes and food and stuff. So my standard was, get the food away. I'm going to bed. I'm exhausted. I had one too many glasses of wine. Um, my wife's standard is, she wants to go to bed. She wants to clean the kitchen. So in the morning when she wakes up like a queen. I'm happy to wake up as a butler. And nobody's right or wrong. It's just that rather than have it create tension, we learned to laugh at it and go, "Oh wow, we have really different standards. Sometimes you'll win, sometimes I'll win," um, or we find a compromise. So, but it doesn't create stress anymore.
and sometimes those realizations can help you appreciate the other person more. There are certain things that have softened for me with my mother, for example, that used to be a trigger and now it's more of an appreciation, because for things like that, yeah, it's like, okay, why do you have to make the comment about my situation? Leave me alone. But on the other hand, I know what to expect from my mom. And
Hmm.
I know what to expect as far as comments, but I also know what to expect as far as like I can go to her house. It's a very clean environment. It's a
Hmm.
and that might not mean hasn't meant a lot to me all the time, but then I go to somebody else's house and it's just like such mess that like I appreciate my mom right now. Like I want to go back to her. But even in people's that during 2020 actually was just a time that I dealt with a lot of judgment. And I had done enough work to realize that judgments are my responsibility. They're not other people's
That's right.
responsibility. But I was
Right.
kind of this in this in between of like, I really feel like I'm right on certain topics and I really feel like people are wrong. But at the same time, like, what is this judgment doing within me? Like, it's not healing me. It's
Right.
not adding to anything good. And so I actually made a challenge for myself to talk to people on the other side. And at the time, I considered myself very liberal. And it's interesting because I do feel like I have very liberal beliefs. I feel like the party's shifted quite a bit. I find myself right smack in the center now. But
Hmm.
part of the work that I did during that time was that what moved me to the center because I realized that every story I had heard on the news about why these people were making these decisions, what they believed about it, how they felt this, how they were this name,
Hmm.
whatever, when I actually talked to them and asked questions very similar to your 4 questions of like, what are you actually concerned about? What is actually important to you? What are your values? I realized that I had the story completely wrong. I still may not land where they're landing on how to fix it,
Hmm.
but I developed a bigger appreciation for what other people's concerns were. And it helped me to stop painting them with this one-sided view that the news was feeding me. And
Hmm.
it's fundamentally changed how I approach things. It's almost, I almost miss being ignorantly ignorantly blissful. Most people are getting information from something like the news, but you have to also understand like everybody has its own conflict of interest. Those news reporters aren't there to just give you the news anymore because they need to build their business model. So they're going to write the headline in the most clickbaity way possible. A lot of times you click into a an article and you realize the article actually says something completely opposite from what the headline says, but they got you in through the headline. But then most people are literally only getting their information by scanning headlines. Oh, look, it just said this proves this. And then you click and it's like, that's not even what the study was about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But that's part of the unconscious listening, hearing, taking in information because we go for surface and we don't take the time to go underneath.
I want to touch back on commitment conversations, just so we're clear on what those really are. Is it just the conversations where we're making a promise, or are there parts of this where that I'm not seeing?
Well, it is about our promises. Well, you can call them commitments, you can call them contracts, you can call them agreements, but we're making agreements and making promises. So that's fundamental. But the trouble is how that conversation works. So I'll just take a quick walkthrough. Every email you write or conversation you have where it contains you want something to happen, you want some action to happen. They only start two ways. They start by you making a request. Can you help me do this? Or do you have this information? Or making an offer. Let me help you. I have some information that might be important to you. That's where it starts. Then we have a yes and a no. Yes, we're addicted to because we want to please people. We don't want to upset the apple cart. We don't want to upset people emotionally. A good example is in business all the time. There are these flyby agreements made. Fred is, a technician at a company. His boss Ruth runs by. Hey, can you do a deck for Monday morning for this meeting? And Fred said, sure. He says yes, sure. He wants to please the boss. He knows what he's doing. He spends 10 hours over the weekend putting together a slide deck, and he gives it to Ruth on Monday morning. She opens up her computer and goes, "Oh, this is so bad. This isn't what I wanted at all." Right? So the lesson there is they made a promise without really agreeing what they were promising to. Every time we have a request that comes our way, there's timing issues, there's authority issues, there's quality issues. And so we don't like no, but it should be part of our vocabulary. But the best way to make a good promise are two things, the two C's. When someone makes a request, ask them questions, clarify what it's about, and what is the timing, who's it for, do you want a lot of pictures, do you want words, what's the quality, what will good look like? You learn those 4 or 5 things, and then you go, wow, okay, I get it. I think that's the right tact. I can't get it to you by Monday morning, but I can get it to you by Monday afternoon. Well, that's what I call a counteroffer. We all know that, but we aren't conscious of how that works. So this dance of commitment conversation is very complex. And the reason it's important is because if we make a good promise, we build trust. If we make a bad promise, a sloppy, quick promise, sure, I can do that for you, and it breaks, then that's where we start saying, "Oh, I'll never ask Fred to do that again because he's not trustworthy." Right? And then that's a slippery slope. And then we have to get into recommitment conversations, which says, how do we recover from bad promises and bad trust? So it's a tricky one. It's not rocket science, but yet we tend to be in it in a sloppy, unconscious way.
Well, thank you for all of the wisdom that you've brought to this idea of conversations, because I've realized I think we're on autopilot through most things until something snaps us out of it, until something disrupts us and makes us look a little more deeply at this. So for me, my life has just been, all right, now there's awareness on this. Now there's awareness on this. Now there's awareness on this. And for some people, it sounds exhausting, but what they don't realize is you get to choose your new autopilot. And I think that's what's been so powerful for me. It's not about all of a sudden every single thing takes so much thought. Now there's a lot of my life that is on autopilot, but I've chosen it rather
Right.
than somebody else choosing it for me, rather than me just adopting it or just growing with it. And so it becomes easy. Then all of a sudden you're doing more things for you in a way that you've chosen, creating a life that you want rather than just living out your programming. And so for
Right.
listeners that are more interested in going deeper on conscious conversations, where's the best place to find your book, and connect with you?
So it's on Amazon. Better yet, ask your local bookstore. Good for the bookstore, good for me.
Yeah.
So it's around. I like supporting local bookstores. My website is chuckwisner.com. And if you scroll down a little bit and you put your email in, you can get a PDF of the introduction. So that's one way. I am on social media, so I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram sort of lightly, Chuck_Wisner. And oftentimes I'll post our podcast when it comes out. And so there's things there. And then I also weekly post sort of just messages from the book about emotions or about, awareness and of storytelling. So yeah, so all that's out there, and people can reach out via my website by email and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you, or I have a question. That's fine.
Your challenge for this week is to catch yourself in one unconscious conversational pattern and then try something different. Maybe it's noticing when you automatically defend your position instead of getting curious about the other person's perspective. This actually just happened to me on Reddit. Maybe it's asking, what are you really concerned about when somebody comes at you with their fists up? The goal isn't to be perfect, but to wake up to how you show up in conversations. You might be surprised what shifts when you stop sleep talking through your relationships. If you are wondering, the conversation on Reddit was about human design. There's a whole lot of people on that platform that believe that human design is a cult. And I couldn't even fathom where that perspective would come from. I'm like, there's no charismatic leader. You're not giving up anything for it. But that Love is Blind UK really sparked some controversy with the spleen guy. If you know, you know. But then I went down the rabbit hole and I was actually looking at people's stories, and apparently there have been a whole lot of charismatic leaders who have used that system to kind of create their own cult-like behaviors. So what do I know? I defended it pretty hard and then I backed down pretty quick after that. But when we begin to see our conversations as sacred exchanges instead of battles to be won, we're actually working with one of the most fundamental laws of the universe. The law of reciprocity. What you put out there comes back to you. And we talked about this last week too. And it's not always in some mystical way. It's pure energetics. When you show up with curiosity instead of defensiveness, you actually change the frequency of the interaction. The other person's nervous system responds to your calm. Their guard drops because you did it first. So it's not just about being spiritual or enlightened. It's about understanding that energy moves through matter. And your body is matter. The stories you carry create tension in your muscles and your breath and your voice. So when you release the need to be right, you release that physical tension, and everyone around you feels it. You become a different kind of presence in the room, and I think that changes everything. So give it a try and let me know how it goes. You can reach out to me at mindlovemelissa on Instagram. You can find all of my incredible sponsors at mindlove.com/sponsors. And make sure you sign up for the Morning Mind Love on the homepage of mindlove.com. Thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.